you think that it's important to reflect on your priorities throughout your life?
Well, we were somewhat talented and we were primarily drilled by my mother.
Okay.
So I bought carbon offsets. I bought 28 euros of carbon offsets. And I thought like, okay, what happens with that money?
We're going to listen to a voice note now from somebody that you know. Can you please put on the headphone?
Wow. Oh, that makes me a bit emotional.
Jacqueline van Ende, welcome to the third episode of the Midlife Crisis podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for being here. By way of quick introduction, you are the daughter of Marianne and Kees, if I'm correct.
Correct.
You have two sisters.
Yeah.
You grew up abroad, but you'll maybe say a bit more about that further on in the episode. Currently, you're the CEO of Carbon Equity, a platform where individuals can invest in funds that are geared towards groundbreaking climate technology and solutions. If I said that right, if I said that correctly, I practiced that one a bit. Today we're going to talk about your youth, your career, and some other things that I picked up in other conversations that you've already had on other podcasts and on the radio. So I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks a lot.
Great.
So to kick us off, the title of this podcast is, of course, The Midlife Crisis.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you actually believe in the phenomenon of a midlife crisis, and if you think you are maybe a person that might fall into that trap of getting there.
I definitely believe in the idea of midlife crisis. I don't think it comes exactly midlife or, well, typically if we think midlife, sort of 50, but I think it happens earlier. I think it happens in your early 30s where you initially, after your student days, you enter your first wave of your career. And people are super career focused. Everybody's very focused on achieving things and making career steps and promotions, etc. And at some point in your early 30s, you'll wake up and think like, wait, why am I doing this? Why am I killing myself for my career? Is this actually what I want to do? And that's sort of a moment of contemplation where people start to reprioritize. And that can be in the sense that you maybe start to deprioritize work or that you want to do something completely differently. So it's a bit of a coming of age. Yeah.
And are those things that you're also already actively thinking about or have been thinking about for the last, let's say, 10 years? I mean, how do you see that for yourself?
I think my view on work is shifting a little bit. I think last year for me was, in that sense, somewhat transformational.
Okay.
In the sense that I've always been extremely work obsessed, and I still am probably a heavy workaholic. I work at least 12 hours a day.
Okay, it's quite a lot.
At a minimum. Yes, it's a lot. And I enjoy that. But I think what changed is until last year, I would say my relationship with my wife is something that sort of figured last in my priorities. So my first priority was always very squarely work.
Yeah.
And then maybe surf or like personal things. And then my relationship. And that led to quite a lot of friction. And she also felt that she at times was the last priority, sort of fitting into the open space between my work. And I think for me, I really made a bit of a mindset shift in the sense I said, no, what is important first is life. And what's the most important foundation of my life is my relationship. And so that is something that comes first. Health should come second is not yet the case. I think I sleep too little and I'm far too hard on myself physically.
I definitely want to talk about that a bit more than later on.
Yes. So for me, now it's relationships come first, and secondly is my work, and then third, my health. So it's a bit of a reprioritization.
So if I hear what you're saying, you think that it's important to reflect on your priorities throughout your life to make sure that you're always putting things in the right order and maybe correcting where, you need to correct things.
Yeah, and I think also priorities naturally shift. Having children is often a pivotal moment that people's reality completely shifts. And that's also the point that you really start taking a different perspective on work and start thinking about what do I want instead of what is expected of me.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel that at some point people sort of career ladders and promotions and bonuses are all sort of like social constructs in a way invented by companies and company owners to trap you and to make you work harder. And at some point in your 30s, you sort of wake up to that and think like,
does this make sense?
Exactly, it doesn't really make sense. Exactly. And so you sort of snap out of that fiction of that making career promotions or achieving certain levels of career success is the holy grail. And I think that's greatly liberating.
You said in your last column for a magazine here in the Netherlands, the quote that you wrote, in your last one, you said that you now have the ambition, and you were just alluding to that, to kind of live a bit slower, to be a bit more mindful about life. You were saying about rejuggling priorities. How is that actually now really going? I mean, so you know what those priorities need to be. Is that also working out?
So what is working out is that I made 2 clear commitments. One is every week I want to have a date night with Andrea, my wife.
Yeah.
And we've stuck to that religiously every week. So we go out for dinner or we go for a drink or walk, but we spend quality time. And that night I don't work, which is an achievement for myself. And the other thing that I committed to is that I only want to spend 2 nights a week in work. So work events. So that's a maximum of 2 nights. And now I actually proactively scan my agenda. And if it's more than that, I often cancel events.
Okay. So we have to get you out of here before 5:30.
Yes.
Okay, clear.
Yeah. So I made a couple of changes, but no, I'm clearly still addicted. Yeah.
Okay. Can you maybe take us through your childhood, what you were like as a child? I was just saying in the introduction, you of course grew up abroad. That theme kind of went through your career as well. So can you maybe explain to us or give us a bit of context as to how Jacqueline was as a child?
I think probably my parents would describe me as a tomboy. I grew up in a very adventurous setting. When I was 1, we moved to Australia, and I lived there until I was 6. My dad was a shell engineer. And afterwards, we lived 4 years in Syria, and every week I would be in the mountains. We would go on trail runs, like between the age of 8 and 11. So it was a greatly adventurous life, and also I grew up with a very sort of global perspective. And I think that shaped me in the sense that later, obviously, we returned to the Netherlands, but I always remained very global in my mindset. So at some point when I was in my private equity career and had the opportunity to move to the Philippines to go start a company there, it was actually quite easy for me to make that decision.
To adapt.
And to go on an adventure. And I think sort of that for me, I would characterize my life and career very much sort of as an adventure. I'm an adventure seeker. That's also why I'm being an entrepreneur, as you will soon find out. It's about being an adventurer. It's really the most adventurous career that you can have. It's about constant learning and discovery. You never know what's next. And one day is uphill and another one is downhill. And I really enjoy that journey. So that's a little of my personal context.
And at some point you moved back to the Netherlands.
Yeah.
You moved to Wassenaar.
Yeah.
And together with your sisters, you went to the Rijnlands, which is one of the middle schools in Wassenaar, where I also attended.
Yeah.
And one of the funny things was that we always had kind of talent nights that we organized at school back then.
I'm scared. Yeah.
Yeah. Be scared. Yeah. And your family was also, or you and your sisters were always referred to a bit as like the Von Trapp family, because you were always the highlight of basically the talent show. So at the end, the familie van the Ende did something, played an instrument or did some singing, and that was always like I said, the highlight of the night. Is that something you recognize? Were you and your sisters always, talented in that sense? is that something you still recollect, or have you kind of pushed that memory aside?
So funny that you remember that. Well, we were somewhat talented, and we were primarily drilled by my mother.
Okay.
So my mother was
Drilled in what? Drilled in what?
she was a bit of an Asian tiger mom,
Okay.
especially when it came to music. She herself did not grow up with like music, and I think that's something that she missed out on her childhood in her childhood. And so she was very fanatic about us practicing. I think I had to practice like 5 days a week, and Saskia as
Really?
well, and my younger
Different
sister.
instruments.
Yeah, I played flute, which is
Yeah.
definitely not my type of instrument. But in Syria, there was only one flute. There was only one teacher, basically, and he played flute, so I played flute.
Okay. Okay.
And Saskia ended up with piano, and my older sister did violin. So we definitely were the Von Trapp family. But we all
Yeah.
had to practice together, and my mom took that very seriously. So we grew up in a rather disciplined way, which obviously I hated back in the day. But I'm very grateful to her, because something that I learned from her is grit, to really persevere and stick with it.
To learn a new skill and
Yeah.
to practice. And
Exactly. And I think she taught us very much, both my parents, it was to be ambitious, to really, go for the highest achievements, not an average one.
After university, or I should say during university, you founded a non-profit kind of boutique consultancy firm called De Kleine Consultant.
Yeah.
And later on, after that, you decided to join a firm called HAL,
Yeah.
an investment firm. I guess two very different things. Why did you make that decision at that time to join HAL? And was it a good choice in hindsight, do you think?
That's a good question. Well, I didn't quite choose HAL. HAL chose me.
Okay.
In the sense it was very unexpected that I landed that job. I had been working, I had founded the Kleine Consultants, indeed a nonprofit student-run strategy consultant.
Yeah.
And
Which still exists today?
yeah, it's now 16 and a half years old, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
amazing.
massively thriving organization. But so I was planning on becoming a strategy consultant. And so I went to interview with all of these strategy consultants. And I think I got turned down by like everyone.
Okay. Unexpected.
Unexpected.
Yeah.
I was the founder of the Kleine Consultants.
Yeah.
And I totally did not see that coming.
No.
So it was a major blow to my ego and self-confidence.
And a big mistake they made, probably in hindsight as well.
No, they were right, but
Okay.
I only figured that out later. But then I was invited to interview with HAL Investments, and I had never heard of them. I didn't know at all what private equity was, but I knew it was prestigious. I knew they hired 1 or 2 people per year, and that sort of the brightest kids in Rotterdam and Delft went to work
Yeah.
with HAL Investments. And so I got this interview invitation, and when I spoke to the recruiter, he said, well, you don't fit our profile, but we want to give you a wild card. So I had a wild card come to the interviews for this job. And it was 2 days of interviews. 6 interviews spread over 2 days.
Yeah.
And in advance, you had to prepare a case. And this case was, what Dutch listed company would you want to buy? And you also got the book Valuation, which is like this thick a book, to read prior to the interview. And I was preparing to drive to South Africa with my then girlfriend. We were going to go on a 3-month drive with the Orange Trophy to the World Cup. And so my mind was definitely not on this interview. And so I'd gotten literally to like page 15 of the book Valuation, and I had not submitted the case in time. So I thought, fuck it, I'm not going to do it.
It's never going to happen.
It's not going to happen for me. So I called the recruiter and I said, look, I'm very sorry, but I'm not going to come. And then she said, yeah, but Jackie, it's as if you're in the Idols finale and like, you're like, no, thank you. And I was like, shit,
Doesn't make
you're
sense.
right. Yes, exactly. And I thought like, and I was on my way, I don't know, somewhere. I got off the train in a Starbucks. I put together a case and sent it like by internet. But anyway, so I entered these interviews 2 days. if you survived the first day of interviews, you were invited to sleep on the SS Rotterdam and have a dinner, and the next day you had another set of interviews. And I was absolutely convinced I was not gonna survive through the first day. I just thought, I'm just gonna go on an adventure for a day as an investor. And so I didn't even bring my toothbrush, like nothing. And somehow I got through that day, and I was invited to like stay for the night. So after my interviews, I went to the coffee company and studied about valuation on Wikipedia because I had zero idea
Last
of
minute
finance.
preparation.
Exactly. And well, the next day, somehow they made
You had to
me an
borrow
offer.
somebody's toothbrush?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I stayed with a friend, exactly. And so entirely unexpectedly, I landed this job with HAL Investments. And only years later, I really understood why. What was not a fit in consultancy and what was a fit in private equity. And the difference was in consultancy, you're expected to really think in a very structured way. You make an issue tree. And what is important is not only that you have the right solution, but you follow the right steps to the solution.
The methodology.
A methodology.
Yeah.
And that's not how my brain works. My brain is here. It literally sits in my gut and sort of like things sort of churn there, and then suddenly there's a solution. And often that's a right solution. I have a very good intuition, but I'm not a very structured thinker. And so in private equity, the difference was you don't need to follow any certain process. You just need a brilliant idea. And you need to be a very original thinker, because in consultancy, you're successful because you follow a very clear process. In investing, you're successful because you have an original idea that nobody else has.
Yeah.
And so the profile of like being an investor actually fit more with me than being a consultant.
I think you make a very important point there, because you talk about a certain skill set that you learn in each type of role that you do. Do you think it's important that people maybe who are listening, who are a bit more early in their career, that they do develop a certain skill set first, whether that be in consultancy, in private equity, or in any type of sector, where they learn to think and work in a certain way? Do you think that that is important?
I think it is very valuable. So, I mean, I've often asked myself, should I have started my entrepreneurial journey earlier? Because it's what I've always wanted. And maybe I would have been a more successful entrepreneur if I had started yet earlier. Who knows? But I do think that in a professional environment, and especially like really sort of an 8-player environment, like a McKinsey or in private equity or investment banking or a top-tier law firm or whatever you do, that you really learn this base skill set of critical thinking, of like doing work at an extremely high level of quality.
What does good look like?
What does good look like? Learn about grit and sort of like, we sat in the office until 10 p.m. every night, sort of. And if you had to cancel your holidays, that's what you did. And sort of, I do think it gives you a bit of a base foundation of quality and professionalism, which is very useful for the rest of your career.
Yeah. Okay. Coming back to the Netherlands, after you were in the Philippines, you just mentioned you founded a company there for Rocket Internet. You were also CEO of a fintech company. Very valuable, of course, because it also kind of linked to your upbringing abroad, right? You just said that made it easier for you to a certain degree. Coming back to the Netherlands, you joined Peak Capital.
Yeah.
And you stayed there, I think, roughly about 1.5 years.
Yeah, correct.
And then you left.
Yeah.
And I've once heard you say, I think in a different episode of a podcast, that there was a specific reason why you left.
Yeah.
Can you recollect what you said about that? And what was the reason you actually left Peak Capital at that time to go do what you do now?
Well, being a VC investor, where you invest in startups, to me made me deeply unhappy. The reason was that I was talking with entrepreneurs every single day.
Yeah.
And every single day I was
got the itch.
thinking, hey, Valerie, I wish I were you. So like, how on earth did I end up on the wrong side of the table again? Like, that was so clear and confronting to me. And the second thing is I had really woken up to sort of the emergency of climate change. And once you start thinking about more existential problems. Like honestly, at some point, I couldn't care less about investing in another SaaS or like efficiency company. No. I mean, all due respect, because obviously investing in SaaS, etc., is like massively value creating and probably also for the planet. But I really felt, okay, the world is on fire. We're heading for human extinction. I just don't want to waste my time, and I wanna do my part. So yeah.
Was that a first time that you really had a moment of reflection where you thought, okay, now is the time to kind of chase that purpose or do something impactful?
Yes, I think it was a more conscious one because I think I've always been quite socially motivated, and the Kleine Consultant was also a non-profit company which really had a vision. And I think switching between a vision-driven or a purpose-driven organization and then being in a very commercial organization, well, not to say that vision-driven companies are not commercial, but then I was working at Moody for Rocket Internet, which was only about making money for shareholders. And so having been in a purpose-driven organization, I knew that that is just something that motivates me so much more. And so for me, that was a bit of a logical homecoming, but it got triggered by reading the book, The Sixth Extinction, which I've spoken about quite often, which talks about the 5 major extinction periods in the history of the planet. And for me, it became so obvious that, like, climate change and biodiversity loss are exponentially faster than anything in history. And so at some point, what was sort of pivotal was that it became so clear. It was crystal clear to me that we're heading for human extinction if we do not change this. And then at that point, you just realize, well, nothing else matters. Literally nothing else is relevant other than solving this thing. So, yeah.
And so you quit, you decided to make the jump to entrepreneur again.
Yeah.
Did you, in that process, talk to people about that? How did you make that jump? I mean, you're leaving a comfortable job, right?
Yeah.
And you've already done quite a few things in your career, but is that still an exciting step? And how did you eventually get to that decision?
Well, truth be told, this journey started before I even started at Peak. So I had the idea for carbon equity in a slightly different version, even prior to joining Peak.
Okay.
I think it was actually in the period between, I had this offer from Peak and they asked me to come to the Netherlands to join them for a pitch with certain investors. So I flew to the Netherlands. And at the point, I had just read that book, The Sixth Extinction. And so I was sitting in that plane and thinking, oh my gosh, I need to do something about my carbon footprint. So I bought carbon offsets. I bought 28 euros of carbon offsets. And I thought, like, okay, what happens with that money? So I investigated that and apparently went to solar panels in India. And then I had this very naive thought of like, why is that a donation? Could I become a co-owner of that solar panel and then financially benefit from investing in the future? So my initial idea was, could we, at point of sale, when you buy a flight ticket or order an Amazon package, invest 0.1% or 1% of your purchase value in breakthrough climate technologies? And as a result, mobilize billions of capital from millions of people and make millions of people a co-owner of the net zero economy. And because people benefit, because there is financial upside and literal ownership, could you create this massive move forward, like enthusiasm, instead of like what now you see is like, people feel demotivated because the whole narrative around the energy transition is there are so many things that we cannot do. So there is a lot of like friction. And my thought was, if you can create sort of a, enthusiasm because you can benefit from it, can we do something different? So anyway, that was the original thought. So that started before I even got to Peak. And then what I've learned as an entrepreneur is that whenever I have an idea, which happens very often, I just share it with anybody. I think on that same trip or in the summer, I met a very old friend of mine. We had met each other 12 years ago. And once upon a time, 12 years ago, we had said, when in the future we are going to start a company together. And so I pitched this idea to her and she was like, let's do it. And a week later, she called me and she said, Jackie, I bought the domain name of carbonequity.com for 5,000 euros. Like, what? You did what?
5,000 euros.
5,000
Okay.
euros. Like,
Not,
what?
not like for 10 euros, but 5,000. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Which is exactly the synergy.
No turning back.
There was no
We
turning
don't have
back.
any money anymore.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, it was perfect and that's also very much a synergy with her because like I'm a thinker, she's a doer. So she kind of forced us into actually doing this thing. And then I pitched it to a couple other people. I started building a team. So throughout the years that I was with Peak, I was already sort of brainstorming and weekends and nights. And at some point we got to sort of an idea where it wasn't quite finalized, but we figured, okay, now we just need to jump because otherwise we're not going to get there. And so on December 31, I quit Peak. And on January 1, I was in business with Carbon Equity.
And I already had the domain name.
And we already had the domain name, yeah.
I think there are two kind of important lessons also for people listening from what you just said. Because there are probably a lot of people listening now that are thinking to themselves, I also maybe want to do something different in my career. I want to be that entrepreneur. It doesn't have to be entrepreneurial, but I want to do something different. How do I make that move? And I think you said two very important things. One, you said, you didn't say it in so many words, but that's what I'm taking from your story. She said, you don't have to do it straight away. You can already have an idea, move into something new, but keep that idea in the back of your mind. And at some point, that idea will evolve into what you want to do. You can't leave it on the back burner too long, because otherwise it'll never happen. But you don't need to, I guess, create pressure for yourself to do it always right in the moment.
Yes.
I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, well, I would say for me, there was a huge amount of fear around entering into entrepreneurship because sometimes when you look at my profile, you'd be like, yeah, but you've always been an entrepreneur. You took that risk. It was like, it was nothing. But that's not true. I was dead scared of becoming an entrepreneur. And there's a very useful book which is called The War of Art, or the War on Art. You have the art of war, but you also have the war of art. And this book talks about why we are very often afraid to do what we really deep down want to do. And the reason for that is that we can dream risk-free, but if we embark on such a path and we fail at our biggest dream, we fail at what we deem is our core identity, that is incredibly painful. Yeah. And so a lot of people experience that fear to such a degree that they never start. And it's easier to dream of ever, sometime in the future, I'm going to write a book. Sometime in the future, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of people never get there. Yeah. And so for me, that book was very helpful in understanding that I just needed to take the leap and at some point cut myself off and start. And it made it less scary because I had co-founders. So that's something I would highly recommend. Like if you have an idea, get a group of people together who hold you accountable, who buy domain names, expensive domain names, sort of force you into like running a business. And the second thing that I realized was that the moment I was doing it, it was a lot less scary than I had originally anticipated, because I realized that I have the fallback in the sense that if it doesn't work out, I can be a consultant for like 100, 200 euros per hour. I can go back to having a job, or worst case, I move in with my mother, like, like
back to Wassenaar.
Back to Wassenaar. Yeah, so there was a fallback, which just made it a lot less scary. And so I think I built up an unreasonable amount of fear, and I imagine a lot of people have the same thing.
And then I think the second thing you said was you started telling people about your dream.
Yes.
And I think that seems like something insignificant, but I actually think it's very important as well, because I have my own experience with that. And that is that if you start sharing it, one, opportunities kind of open up to you because people know, and when they think about you, they think about what you've said.
Definitely.
They you sometimes get caught up in it in a good way. And it also maybe forces you a little to then actually make good on what you're saying, because if you tell people, then you cannot, sit back and do nothing.
Exactly. So how did you do that? Like, what was your experience in that?
So I'm looking now maybe to join a startup.
Yeah.
And I was telling people within Shell, where I also work, that I was very interested in getting involved in a startup.
Yeah.
And a colleague of mine at Shell at the time, who was involved in a startup, remembered me saying that, and then gave me a call one day and asked me to join in on certain meetings that they were having, and that's how I kind of.
Yes, exactly.
But if I had not been saying that to people,
Yes.
right, and I probably said it to too many people, and the message kind of got annoying.
Yeah.
But she would have never thought of me in that moment.
Definitely. It's one of my rules for life is like, if you want something, say it out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
And then, so now Carbon Equity, right? Where you're now together with 3 other co-founders.
Yeah.
I guess you're really the face and sometimes, as you call it, the mascot of the company, right?
Yeah.
So everybody sees you, but there are 3 other co-founders.
That's right. I'm the Mickey Mouse.
Yeah. Maybe interesting to talk about that in a minute as well.
Yeah.
Kind of like, what are the others in the company doing to kind of build out a personal brand as well? And does that maybe alleviate some of the burden that you have in that space as well, even though you probably enjoy it and are very good at it? But can you, for the listeners who maybe don't know what Carbon Equity does, I mean, I gave a one-liner on it in the introduction, but that doesn't do it justice. Can you maybe take the listeners along and what do you actually do, and what was the reason for starting that company?
Yeah. So Carbon Equity is an investment platform that, as you correctly explained, makes it possible for private individuals to invest in breakthrough climate technology and energy transition infrastructure.
Okay.
Alongside the world's best investors. So it's not like typically making an angel investment where you invest in a single company, but you invest with the world's best climate, venture capital, growth, and buyout funds together, which, as an advantage, ensures that the world's best investors are investing for you. So literally, Bill Gates is investing your capital in breakthrough climate companies.
It's one of the funds that you have within Carbon Equity.
Yes, exactly. And secondly, you're diversifying your risk because you're not investing in a single company, but in dozens up to hundreds of companies. So we try to make investing in breakthrough climate technology accessible by lowering the minimum amount. Typically, if you want to invest in the top climate venture capital or buyout funds, you would need 5 to 10 million euros. We bring that down now to 20,000 euros. And secondly, we make it accessible by lowering the risk of investing in that team. And third, by making that easily digitally accessible. So like in a very easy sense, like we're basically like the hero for investments in non-listed, so not on the public stock market, but before that, breakthrough climate technology and energy transition infrastructure companies.
And is this the first of its kind?
Yeah, exactly. So it is the first of its kind globally, actually, where you can invest in private equity with a purpose of helping build a better future. And our goal by making impact private equity accessible is to unlock billions of dollars of private capital to help fund solutions to the world's biggest challenges, starting with climate change, but in the future maybe also health tech or emerging markets or education. So I really believe my core philosophy is what I call money as a means instead of money purely as a goal in itself, to buy a big house or a flashy car. Money as a means to help solve the world's biggest challenges, where you make financial returns and at the same time help build a better future.
And can you maybe mention a few examples of these technologies that people are then investing in? Like, what are the ones that make you most enthusiastic?
Well, there are many
there are
cool
loads
companies,
of them.
But one of the cool companies that is actually doing really well right now under the Trump presidency is called Fervo Energy. It's our geothermal unicorn. And this company has a drilling technology. Actually, it's interesting because the founders all came from the fracking space in the US. And now they're using that same fracking technology to be able to drill holes to generate geothermal energy, to unlock heat in a much more cost-efficient way. And they're really making spectacular progress. So that's one really cool company. And last Wednesday, we had our annual community event and we had Syre. And Syre is a textile-to-textile recycling company. So they collect secondhand polyester clothes and recycle the fibers into new polyester thread at the same quality that it originally was. And they are doing amazing. They had 100 million Series A investments, insanely. And they have a 600 million offtake agreement with H&M. So that's, a couple of examples. But also, for example, AI. So we have a company called Cobalt Minerals, and they have developed an AI to detect and find critical minerals for the energy transition in a much more efficient way. So all kinds of hardware and software solutions that are critical in decarbonizing the planet.
And what are typically the investors that now, I think you have some a bit north of 300 million now under management or under, I don't know how you say that.
Yeah.
What is the makeup of that investor base? So are we talking individuals who do that amount of 20,000 euros up to, I guess, 100,000 euros or something like that? Or is it also bigger parties? I think you also refer to family offices and other kind of parties that invest. What's the makeup of that customer base?
At the moment, still very high net worth. So it's a lot of entrepreneurs who sold their companies. It's a lot of partners in professional services firms, so at law firms or consultancies, etc. A lot of private equity investors themselves, family offices, a lot of next gens who are inheriting capital.
Yeah.
And now, in the next 2 weeks, we're launching our 20K entry product. And we've done a couple of pilots before, offering access from 10K or 20K. And that's actually where we meet the emerging senior professional. So a lot of people who are in a mid to senior management layer, people are sort of like starting to move towards peak career. So 35-year-olds who have bought their first house and they now have some capital that they can invest for the long run. And a lot of people investing their pensions or inheritances or bonuses, etc. So people just receive a bit of a lump sum and then say, okay, I want to invest that with a good financial return, because we target market rate returns of 10 to 15%, depending on how much or what fund you choose.
Okay.
But with the highest level of true climate impact and really moving the needle on financing innovations that can really deliver massive climate outcomes.
And I think I've heard you say before that the goal that you have kind of thrown into your organization is to have 10 billion under control, under, let's say...
under control, I like that
under
word.
control, managing 10 billion of investment by, I think you said within 10 years. So the company exists 3 years now, I think. So in another
7 years left.
In 7 years left to go. Right? And you said, I probably, I'm also okay with 5 billion, right? But you have a very big goal there.
Yeah.
How do you see that? How is that process going? And why do you think it's important to set such a big goal within your company?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I want to set such a big goal. One, because I honestly think it is achievable. I'm not saying it's achievable within the next 10 years, maybe it'll take 20 years, but I'm fairly confident we're going to get there one day. And secondly, because I think we really need to think big. And because, well, the energy transition needs it. I mean, great that we have 300 million, but that's not going to move the needle, right?
No.
So it's really about doing this at scale, and I think that's possible. And one important thing that I learned from another entrepreneur, Wouter Goort, he's a Dutch investor, and he taught me to think big. And he said one time, at some point, I was running a fund and I was fundraising, and every week I was calling people and sort of like finding 100K here, 100K there. And then he said, I asked myself, what if I had 100 million week? What would I do different if I had 100 million week?
What would you need to do to create 100 million week?
Yes, exactly. What would I do different if I set myself the goal of 100 million week?
Yeah.
Oh, now you're going to start thinking big. Okay, so who are the wealthiest people that I know? How am I going to take a moonshot or like really a shoot for the stars instead of like a moonshot? So it forces you to think at a much bigger scale, which that stretches your ambition, but also leads to much more daring actions.
Yeah, and also for your colleagues, I guess, they have also a big ambition to work towards, and you
Yeah.
start thinking about how are we actually going to achieve that? You kind of
Exactly.
start that discussion.
Yes, exactly. And I think, it's great that we're at 300 million. And I'm a little bit of a glass half empty kind of thinker, so it's a bit of impatience. But it also helps us understand, and that literally is a feeling that I have, is that it's day one for carbon equity. It's really, really a starting point. And so, and that's an important mindset for the company as well. We're only getting started.
Yeah. I think I've read somewhere that you've also talked about conversations that you have career-wise or about other topics with a coach.
Yeah.
Can you maybe say a bit more about that? Is that something you would recommend to other people as well? Is it nice to have somebody that objectively talks to you about certain topics?
Yes, it's extremely good investment, and I definitely need it because, well, there are obviously more there are subjects sort of that emerge in sort of your leadership and lots of things that you can get feedback on. But for me, it's especially valuable in the mental roller coaster that you go through in building a company.
Yeah.
Because again, from the outside, it looks like, oh, she's in an amazing position. You have a company now with 30 plus people, and I don't know, you have 300 million, or like you're in a magazine, whatever. Sort of, it looks like amazing.
You're on podcasts.
And the reality of it is more like I weekly go through moments of tremendous fear, of really spiraling into, especially like right now, this is a really tough moment for the investment markets in general because of all of the uncertainty with Trump.
Yeah.
The climate momentum has completely turned around.
Yeah.
We need to be fundraising for carbon equity because we ourselves are a venture-backed company. And then twice a year we go on workation, and it's really an amazing thing that we do. And we take the whole company and we sit in, I don't know, a house or a farm or a castle or whatever for a whole week. And it's like work hard, play hard. And it's such a highlight. And in this workation, I was feeling terrible because I was seeing all these people have an amazing time. And I was thinking, like, how am I going to keep it afloat? And
you need to sustain it.
Yes, how do I sustain it? How do I make sure that we still grow in this really difficult market environment? And so that goes back to existential fears of like, can I even be successful as a CEO? Maybe I just rode the tailwinds of the market. Maybe this was never a good business. Maybe I was never a competent entrepreneur. And so all kinds of fears and voices start to emerge, which are very detrimental. Sometimes I face investors where I feel like now I need to perform, but I'm not feeling it. And those are very difficult moments that really feel like, incongruence. So you need to perform, but you're not feeling it. And so those are also moments that you go through. And I think it's extremely helpful to have a coach. And sometimes we do meditations to go through the fears or the anxieties or the voices in my head that sort of hold me back. And I think it's very important to have a good partner in your life who supports you and who can be a foundation, like literally a safety harbor where you can come home. And that's also why my perspective on what is important in life shifted so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you were saying earlier in the conversation that health wasn't maybe one of those key priorities, at least, right? Because you're sleeping a little less than maybe you would want to. But it does sound like what you were saying now, that through a coach and through kind of that important base at home, that at least from a mental perspective, you are, let's say, laying a good foundation to be able to weather that storm.
Yeah, I really am investing in that sense in the right things. And I do try to invest also my monthly, in my daily rhythm. So I wake up at 5, and then now instead of diving straight into my work, I first do half an hour of fitness or breathing or meditation. So that I also start my day right in that sense, and only then do I start to work. So I try to invest in it, but I'm also blessed with being a pretty strong, like physically strong, resilient kind of person. And I think, a lot of people in their 40s and 50s at some point run into health scare and then only then realize, how much they have mistreated their bodies. And I think that's, I hope that will not happen to me, but it could. So I'm still not doing that in the right way to really be fully healthy.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Before we continue, a quick word about our partner and sponsor, Longevity. As we grow older, we all want to sustain peak performance, both mentally and physically. Longevity is a company that will do this for you by creating health insights and an action plan by which you can live your best life. So if you're interested, check the link below. One of the things that I've been rather fascinated by recently is the fact that people can build a personal brand quite easily online these days.
Yeah.
I'm doing it here, for example, by hosting a podcast. I see that you are also doing that online, whether that's consciously or not. Interesting to get your take on that, because you write columns, you sit in on podcasts, you're on stage quite a bit, and you post about things that you have an opinion on LinkedIn, for example. Is that something that you consciously plan to do, or is that just your enthusiasm about what you do taking control?
I think my personal brand, and as far as I have a personal brand, sort of emerged quite organically. I think I was a bit of I was quite early on LinkedIn. I think in the Philippines, I was a little bit of a real estate celebrity at some point. That a marketing manager would push me into media interviews. And so I think I already had quite a platform. And then coming to the Netherlands at peak gave me quite a launch pad. And as a woman, you have a very clear advantage because there are always too few women on stage or in podcasts, etc. And so you get invited quite a bit. And so I started building that brand. And secondly, I started voicing my opinion and just actually sort of capturing thoughts. And what I noticed is that when I have a thought and write it down in the most honest way, then often it resonates and
with a certain group of people.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes you're able to capture a thought in writing that a lot of people have, but don't necessarily dare say. And that's something that then gives a certain virality to your posts. And so I think it emerged organically. And at some point I got asked to be a LinkedIn top voice, etc.
Yeah.
And I really struggle with that idea of personal brand building as a goal in itself. And for me, LinkedIn is a constant love-hate affair because I wrestle with it every week because on one hand, okay, you have this LinkedIn influencer status, and the moment that you start being aware of it, it affects your authenticity and spontaneity in writing. So sometimes I have no inspiration, but I feel this pressure of like, oh, should I write something? Because otherwise I might lose my status, perhaps, or my reach. It's funny, the more we accumulate, it's something I think about quite a bit, but the more we accumulate, the more we fear loss. And sort of at some point, the motivation, this is the same in wealth, right? The more people have, the more they fear losing it instead of enjoying building it up.
Yeah.
But it's the same a little bit with LinkedIn, that it sort of also causes this pressure on, do I need to stay relevant by constantly staying on this platform? And then, so I was one of the OGs of sort of accidental personal brand building. And now it's become a thing where actually everybody's building a personal brand and people are sort of actively investing on it. So LinkedIn is getting more and more crowded with voices and it's funny, Andrea often remarks that my whole company is now taking on a Jackie voice on LinkedIn. So we actually are extremely loud and noisy on LinkedIn.
But does it help you in business? Does it open doors for you that might otherwise not have opened doors?
Massively, massively. I would say so much of Carbon Activity's success is due to the fact that I've spoken about it in podcasts,
marketing,
in media, and that people follow you on LinkedIn. Almost anybody who has invested through Carbon Equity already followed me on LinkedIn for years. So they get to know a certain person and ultimately they trust you and then invest on that person. So, I mean, undeniably, brand building is very helpful.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important to stay authentic And for me, that authenticity is about really capturing thoughts worth sharing. So the moment that you start thinking about, okay, what do I need to say on LinkedIn, or what will I write in my post? I think that's sort of like a bit of a red flag. It should rather be about what thoughts do I capture, and then, capturing words and then share. So it's about having thoughts, or original thoughts worth sharing, more than producing content to stay relevant on LinkedIn.
Yeah, makes sense. We're going to start wrapping up. I have one more question and a voice note from somebody that you know. That's always how we end the episode. But the last question is, if you could go back to your 12-year-old self, if you could go back in time to the little girl Jacqueline, where she was then, and give her a message, tell her something, what would you say? What would you say to her?
I think I would ask her to trust her intuition more. I think for me, the whole transition coming from Syria to Wassenaar was a hard one. I entered in groep 8 and pre-high school. And Wassenaar, as you know, is a pretty homogenous place. And I always felt a little bit different, even if people are extremely friendly and welcoming, etc. But I struggled a little bit in Rijnland, sort of fitting in or finding my space. And I think I would have benefited more going to The Hague, to a slightly more diverse school. Yeah. I always knew that deep down, but I never acted on it. And I knew I was fascinated by surfing, but I didn't get to act on it. And so learning to, in a earlier phase, to recognize that intuition and to accept it as true, right? And I think a lot of us have intuitions where there's a difference between having that intuition and also accepting that that is your truth and that you should or can live by it. Yeah. I think I would have wanted to do that earlier.
I think that's a very powerful message. We're going to listen to a voice note now from somebody that you know. Can you please put on the headphone and I will play it?
Okay.
Then I'll just ask you for a quick comment about it.
I'm so curious who this is.
Hey, Jacques, your little sister here. I'm super proud, of course, of what you've built with Carbon Equity, but I'm also proud of that you're more than just Carbon Equity. You're a very loving and loyal wife to Andrea. You're a great mother for your 2 cats. You're a really talented pastry chef, which we all benefit from as family. And you're just a loyal and generous friend and sister. And now I also get to experience you as a boss, which I'm honored to be part of Carbon Equity now. And and to see you as a boss that is both caring and daring and needlessly insecure, because you're really doing an amazing job. I'm proudly living in your shadow.
Wow. Oh, makes me a bit emotional.
Why does that make you emotional?
It's a really sweet message. My sister.
Yeah.
And I guess it makes me a bit emotional because in our family, we don't talk about emotions and we never say these kind of things to each other. I'm proud of you, or I love you, or I admire you, or something like we don't have the language for that in our family. And so that's really beautiful to hear her say that.
She asked me if the message was maybe too emotional when she sent it to me. I said, no, it's great. It's really personal. Yeah. And I think it also really shows that you are so much more than only Carbon Equity, right? Than your work, where you spend so much time and so have so much passion for.
I think that also hit a nerve for me because I am so single-minded. So I appreciate that she says that because that at times is a pain point that is so much of my life, and that I'm happy that she sees that I am also a good partner or a good sister. probably could do a lot better. I could be a better friend to a lot of my friends. I can be a better wife, and I can be a better family member. But that's very nice of her to say.
Yeah. So maybe in rounding off, I think that this was a super valuable conversation for me as well. I've been anticipating this chat for a very long time. Wasn't as easy to get the date to actually do it, but I'm really happy that you came by this afternoon, even though it didn't totally fit with your agenda. So I'm really grateful for that. I think you gave a number of good lessons for people out there as to how you are kind of looking at your priorities in your life now and kind of reassessing that and making sure that that is in line with the way that you want to kind of live out your life, right? And make sure that you're happy in that space. I think Andrea's really happy for date night, right? And that you have these commitments where also towards the things that you want to prioritize, that you're actually doing that.
Yeah.
And I wish you all the best of luck with Carbon Equity. I hope you reach that 5 billion or 10 billion and you get to where you want to go, and that becomes a major success. So very, very thankful for you being here, and it was a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. And sort of, I hope that the next phase of my life is about having more weight on life and a little bit less weight on work, and living life more fully. Because as you also notice, as we grow older, life just goes so fast, and I want to slow it down by being more conscious, being more present in my life. And so that's the next phase. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.